Hello once again. Montsegur, its story, what some people describe as the Massacre of Montsegur, but in actual fact it's a love story. It's a tragic love story, but still a love story, because at the heart and soul of the Cathar movement, of Catharism, was love about friends, family, universal love, unconditional love for all, and including the environment, for nature.
In the end, love is all that matters, not rules.
I suppose one could call this the happy times. It was before the Catholic Church got involved and were out to destroy the Cathar movement. When the local lords in the Languedoc and the southern part of France, they certainly squabbled amongst themselves, but they protected the peasants and left them to their own devices. Some of the Cathar lords or their family were highly involved with the Cathar movement. But the locals in the villages and the peasants in the field, they went about with their normal affairs, and of course at harvest time there were celebrations, and the Cathar Perfecti got involved with those celebrations, and they drank wine, watered wine. The Cathars weren't into getting drunk, but they were into drinking wine. And they sang and they danced with the Cathars. They intermingled. They were Cathar. The people and Cathars were family.
To the harvest!
The happy times came to a crushing end when the Catholic Church got involved and simply wanted to wipe out the Cathars and their movement. And their time came to strike, or their excuse to do this, to create a crusade against the Cathars, came when their papal legate was murdered by some Cathar knights. To give this situation some context, the church was already interrogating, with the Dominicans were already interrogating locals and villagers and peasants, and they were, in some cases, they were sentenced to death, but in most cases they were sentenced to imprisonment for varying lengths of time.
Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth!
You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison.
So these Cathar knights murdered the papal legate, the delegate of the Pope himself, when they were on their way to some village to interrogate and possibly imprison the people, and these were families of these knights. So the knights decided that they would strike first, and they came in and they literally murdered half a dozen inquisitors.
Kill them all!
The murder of his own legate enraged Pope Pius III, but it also gave him the excuse to attack and do something about the Cathar movement. He appointed Arnold Amaric, a Dominican monk, to take over and be in charge of a crusade, to preach a crusade against the Cathars. And here is a medieval manuscript or drawing showing the Pope Pius handing over his instructions to Arnold and Merrick. The good Pope Pius III went on to say, let's exterminate these Cathars.
The Cathars need to be exterminated.
Which they did, and ultimately took a few hundred years, but they succeeded. But not without the help of the Inquisition. The Cathars and their few bishops and the perfecti, and I'm sure many followers, realised they were being threatened by the Catholic Church, by the might and power of the Catholic Church. So they needed to take means to protect themselves. And the head bishop, which was Gulabad de Castro, he was a chubby man. Some people refer to him as a Cathar Friar Tuck. But he was a happy, jolly man, and he requested from the Lord, Lord Perel, who owned the lands and who owned Montsegur, that could they create a fortified village on the peak of Montsegur, for it to become a refuge and a centre for the Cathar movement.
Lord Peril, would you allow the peak or POG area to be a fortified sanctuary for the Cathar Perfecti and their followers?
Gulabad de Castro's request was granted, and unfortunately Gulabad, he died of natural causes at Montsegur, and he was replaced by in some ways the opposite. He was a tall, lean, aesthetic Bertram Marty. But Bertram Marty was loved nonetheless. So the Cathars set about, with their people and their workmen, set about creating from stone from the quarry on Montsegur, on the top of Montsegur, and as well as wood from the forest, to create this, and successfully created a Cathar stronghold, a fortified town on the top of Montsegur. And there were literally, in the end, there were hundreds of people who were gathered on top of Montsegur before the siege actually began. Bertram Marty, the new bishop, realised that they could not, the Cathars themselves were against killing animals or people. They were, I suppose you call Western Buddhists in that respect. But they treated all life as sacred. But at the same time, they knew they had to defend themselves. So what they did, which was normal at that time, people hired mercenaries, sergeant-at-arms, men skilled in the arts of warfare. And here's Bertram Marty welcoming some sergeant-at-arms, hard-bitten types with their wives who accompanied them, and who threw in their lot with the Cathars and were paid to defend the Cathars.
Dear friends, I warmly welcome you all.
As time went on, more and more knights, foot soldiers, mercenaries, routiers, rabble, bandits, virtually, all came from the north, so they could, which was originally a religious movement to eradicate Catharism, but it eventually became a land grab. So the lords from the north could grab pieces of land in the south as they defeated the Cathar lords and knights. They then grabbed the land. So more and more fighting people came from the north, intent in grabbing some spoils for themselves, enriching themselves. To look at Montsegur, its shape, it looks indefensible. I mean, you wonder how anybody could climb up its cliffs, and it was that way. But some Basque mountaineering mercenaries did manage to. They were shown a bit of a path, but they still climbed these cliffs. They were looking for a piece of flat ground whereby they could build their mangonel, but first they had to get up the cliffs.
Keep going, men! We are nearly there!
The Basque mercenaries, after climbing the cliffs, had more troops come up there, and there was many a fierce battle for that area of flat ground where they wanted to build a mangonel. So there was some very heavy, fierce fighting that went on there, but ultimately the crusading knights managed to overwhelm the Cathar defenders, who retreated further up onto the mountain. But this allowed a mangonel to throw stone missiles at the walls of the fortified village above, and also into the village itself. And because the missiles make no noise, they just come out of the sky, and quite a few people were wounded or killed from these missiles, as well as slowly they were knocking down the houses and the buildings in Montsegur. They say that the mangonel fired missiles both by day and by night.
Take them down! Release the mangonel! The stone strikes true! Praise be to God!
Eventually, the entire base of Montsegur was surrounded by knights and mercenaries, fighting men, knowing that they had little hope of anyone coming to their aid. Two perfecti, Matthias and also Pierre Bonnet, climbed down what they call the portile, which is a cleft in the sheer cliffs of Montsegur, which no one thought could be ascended or descended. And they took down with them, each were loaded down, and it says that it was gold, silver, money, Cathar money that needed to be paid to different people, and this was taken down for safekeeping. Probably there were also some sacred books as well. Pierre Bonnet took them safely and were hidden. Matthias returned up the portile, taking with him 2 crossbowmen, which were a welcome addition to the people fighting on the Pog, on the peak. Later he descended again. This time his mission was to meet with the Captain Caberio, who commanded something like 20-odd hard-bitten mercenaries, which would have made a huge difference to the fighting people on the peak.
We are ready to depart.
Then lead us, Perfecti.
But unfortunately, the base of Montsegur was, there were so many troops that they literally could not get through. Matthews himself got through and once again climbed the cliffs, the Portil, and he returned and of course was burnt with the others in March 1224. After enduring a siege lasting 10 months, which took them well into winter, and with no hope of rescue, the Cathars surrendered to the crusading forces. The terms were interesting in that the crusading lords and knights agreed that the fighting men on Montsegur, which included some mercenaries, were allowed to leave the peak and also take their arms. They did not have to leave their arms behind. The Cathars requested a period of 2 weeks where they could make preparations for the fact that they knew they'd all be burnt sometime in the near future. That request was granted. Many believe that request was asked for because they needed to prepare people for the fact that they're all going to be burnt and how to prepare themselves to literally walk into the flames. One of the most poignant stories to do with Montsegur was that 5 sergeant-at-arms, mercenary fighting men, together with their wives, asked Bertramati that they be allowed to stay behind and be burnt with their Cathar friends. One of those, his name was Pons Narbona. In that time that they were defending the Cathars, these mercenaries, by their example, the way they conducted their lives, who knows, but they asked to stay behind and die with their Cathar friends. And the request, of course, was granted by Bishop Bertramati.
We want to die with our Cathar friends.
Early on the morning of 16th of March 1244, soldiers from the crusading armies forcibly herded 220 Cathars down this dangerous path from the peak of Montsegur down to the base of the mountain. They were just in a white shift, and they were also in bare feet. They were led into a field where a palisade had been erected and all the faggots and wood was assembled to be lit and welcome the Cathars to be burnt. The first to be burnt and walk towards the flames was the Cathar Bishop Bertram. So he walked tall, brave and alone and confronted the flames. When all was alit and was fully ablaze, the remaining 220 Cathars and their mercenary friends were all driven into the flames by knights on horseback and were urged on by certainly the priests and the monks, who screamed out, "Deus vult, Deus vult, God wills it, God wills it." A little bit similar to Allah Akbar, God wills it. But this was the Catholic version, Deus vult, Deus vult, God wills it, God wills it. After the 220 were consumed by the flames, the following day local villagers came out and with reverence collected the ashes of their friends, possibly family, and took the ashes away to be buried, but for posterity. With the loss of Montsegur as a central location for the Cathar movement in the south of France, the heart and soul of the Cathar movement ceased to be. From that point onwards, it was a matter of decline, with the burning of Guillaume-Belabast nearly 100 years later. Catharism as a movement ceased to exist. An interesting point which came up again and again, because when the Cathars, even when they died in their hundreds, they did not scream. Must have been quite disappointing for the onlookers not to have these heretics screaming. Is there a reason? Probably a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is that to the Cathars, with their beliefs, they weren't dying or being killed, they were actually being born. They were being born for greater things. So rather than a momentary period of pain, it was a momentary period of joy. The joy of birth, of being born. At best estimates, and with the help of AI, it is thought that there were no more than 2,000 perfecti, both mainly in the south of France and in the north of Italy. But those 2,000 perfecti and their methods, their loving ways, scared the wits out of the Catholic Church. How many people died? Again, no one really knows, but according to AI and best estimates, between 500,000 and 1 million Cathars died, one way or another. Imprisonment, burning, or whatever. Sometimes simple starvation. We will never know, but it has to be one of the most interesting periods in medieval European history. The story of Montsegur. Bye for now.
In the end, love is all that matters, not rules.